If you watch my most recent video, you might know that I ran 19 miles this past Sunday. But believe it or not, just 5.5 years ago, I could barely make it to the grocery store walking. Sometimes I had to use motorized grocery carts. I was in really bad shape. My joints really hurt. And I decided to make a change. I lost 110 pounds back in 2020. And I thought that it would fix all of my problems, make me feel better about myself and my body. And it didn't. There was more work to be done. And I'll tell you more about that in this video. I did it. I lost 110 pounds. You know, I tried a lot of times over my adult life to lose weight. And I always gave up for some reason or another. I'd lose 10 to 20 pounds and then I would just give up. But I actually did it this time. I told myself for years that when I finally reached that number that I was aiming for, that everything would get better. I'd be more confident. I'd feel good about myself. I'd be happy. But after that scale showed me that magic number I had been aiming for, and the initial high of succeeding wore off, a different kind of feeling started creeping in. I felt more confused, more insecure, and more lost than I did before I even started. So this isn't your typical weight loss story. This is the story of what happens after the transformation. When you're the after picture, how life goes on after that. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that losing weight hasn't benefited my life. It has, in a lot of ways, but not because I look better, but because I feel better. You know, I haven't always been overweight, but I have always been big. I'm 5'10", and I've always been bigger than all my friends, and even some of my male friends. In the 90s and early 2000s, the goal for women was to be as thin as humanly possible. And those standards of being stick thin and wearing a 00 size pants was just never attainable for me. I have a large body. I was a size 8 at my smallest. I always felt self-conscious being the bigger person in my friend groups, even though I was a perfectly healthy weight. When I moved away from home, and I stopped taking my ADHD meds, and I stopped doing a lot of the team sports I was doing, like gymnastics and swim team, and I moved out and got a job, and I had adult money, and I started spending that money on going out to eat and being less active. I gained some weight. And then when I got married and I started having babies, I started getting heavier and heavier. After being obese for 15 years or more, I started to just accept that that's who I was. It's how I was. And as long as I didn't look in any mirrors and I didn't think about it too hard, I felt fine. But in reality, it wasn't fine. And although my labs were all normal and I was, for all intents and purposes, a healthy fat person, I wasn't very healthy. My knees hurt and my hips hurt, and I had pretty bad asthma. And I couldn't walk very long. I couldn't even go to the grocery store, and I often had to use the motorized grocery carts. At 270 pounds, I told myself that I was heavy because I was in pain, which is partially true. I do have some underlying hypermobility, which makes me have a little bit more pain in my joints than average. But my weight wasn't helping, and it was making things worse. I just wasn't willing to admit it. Back in 2020, when the world shut down for COVID, I read an article about the certain risk factors that made more severe COVID and risk of hospitalization higher. And obesity and asthma were two of those. And I can't fix my asthma, but I could do something about my obesity. So I decided to do it. I finally decided to buckle down and just do it. I started tracking my calories and eating just a little bit less, and then a little bit less, and then a little bit less over time, instead of doing anything drastic. I eventually cut my calories down to about 2,000, 2,500 calories a day, so nothing crazy. I did start moving more as well. I started taking walks. I was fortunate enough at the time to live right at the edge of town, so I had a lot of rural road area to walk through where I could be outside and not encounter other people. I started with about 10 minutes of walking a day, maybe just around the block, and then I got a little farther and a little longer every day until I was walking about 3 to 5 miles a day. And I lost 110 pounds in 7 months. It was really fast. I was surprised with how fast it was. I wasn't doing anything crazy, but I got down 160 pounds from 270, which still sounds high, but remember, I'm a tall person, and that's within the healthy BMI range for me. At first, I was thrilled. I was finally a healthy weight. Everyone was complimenting me. They said I looked great, and they were proud of me for all the progress I made. But the longer that I was thin, the less happy I was about it. I started to notice other things that I hated about my body, like my saggy boobs or this flap I have on my stomach that won't go away. I have saggy skin literally everywhere, on my arms, on my butt, on my face even. Like, my face is melty instead of plump like it used to be. And this has started to be all I noticed about myself, even though I was at a healthy weight. So I started to look into plastic surgery. I went to a few consults with plastic surgeons, and those sessions were awful. You had to get into this paper gown, and the doctor would come in and he would look at all your body parts. They would always like grab all my loose skin and they'd say things like, "Oh wow, that's substantial." And then they'd tell me I needed an extended tummy tuck because a regular one wasn't good enough for all the loose skin I have. And then they'd say things like, if I'm going to get my tummy tuck, I need to also get the back fat, the back skin loosened, back skin removed as well. Or else, once the tummy tuck was done, that's all anyone would see, would be the flaps in other places. After pointing out every problem area I had, they'd always hand me a quote for like $40,000 or something ridiculous. And then I would just drive home and cry because I can't afford that. And now I know I need all of this stuff fixed to look good. I'd lost the weight, but I was still a fat person. I still didn't look right. I also didn't know how to stop being a person who was losing weight. I didn't know how to stop tracking all my calories. I didn't know how to start eating for a person who was trying to stay the same weight. And I would weigh myself every day, and if my weight crept up even a little bit, I would start to panic. In my mind, if I started to gain a little bit of weight, then that meant I was definitely going to gain all 110 pounds back, and there was no in between for me. So I just kept micromanaging. I kept tracking everything I ate. I kept weighing myself every day and making sure I stayed within that range that I had set for myself. Was I doomed to be in this micromanaging hell forever? I had to face the truth that my size and my weight was never the problem. It was just the most obvious symptom of the problem. The unhappiness and insecurity and the feelings of not being good enough, those were all still there, and those are the things that I had to address. It was about 4 years into this that I decided to start running instead of just walking every day for exercise. And when I started running, I could fuel some of that micromanaging ADHD energy into my running. I set myself some goals and I worked to achieve them. I started focusing less on how my body looked and more on what I could do with it. And as I started doing that, I needed to start changing my diet to meet the demands of my new activity level. I do have a tendency to have hypoglycemia, and running makes that harder to manage. So I started micromanaging my diet again in order to make sure I was getting all of the macronutrients I needed to support my running. I also started lifting weights because I wanted my muscles to be stronger for running better. And as I did that, my body started changing again. I started getting a little heavier, but my body wasn't changing how it looked, like the size wasn't changing. But I panicked about that for a little bit. So running didn't fix everything, but it helped. And again, I'm not gonna lie to you. I do still care what my body looks like. I find myself body checking in the mirror, or checking my outfit before I go for a run to make sure my belly flap is sufficiently held down and doesn't look too lumpy, and that my hair isn't looking weird, or that my wrinkles aren't too obvious. But I spent years assuming that confidence is the prize you get for having the correct body size. I learned the hard way that if you are not confident when you're heavy, you're not magically gonna be confident when you're thin. What am I doing to improve things? I'm doing a few things. First, I had to change the why for what I'm doing. I had to change my motivation from being all about getting the right body and the right weight to focusing on how my body feels and how much I enjoy the things I'm doing. And I also had to start practicing self-compassion. I'm trying to not speak to myself in a way that I wouldn't speak to my kid or my friend. So I would never tell my kid that they can't have a slice of pie or else they'll get fat. And I would never tell my friend that they should change their outfit because they look really fat. And if I'm not going to tell them that, I shouldn't be talking to myself that way either. And then, of course, I had to change my relationship with both food and exercise. And I admit, when I first started exercising and I started taking those daily walks, the goal was to lose weight. The goal was to tip the balance of calories in and calories out so that I could lose weight. But as I started going out every day, and the longer my walks got, and the more I realized I enjoyed being outside and reflecting and enjoying nature, the more I realized I really just enjoyed doing those things for the sake of doing those things. When I started running, it became even more apparent that I really just enjoy doing that. And so I'm making it less about what the activity does for my daily calories or for my fitness level, and I'm doing it more for my enjoyment. The exception to this is weightlifting. I don't love weightlifting. I do it specifically because it helps me reach my goals for running. Also because I know that long term, and as I age, my body will function better if I do some weight and resistance training. But again, that isn't about how my body looks or how it will look long term. It's about how it will function long term. So I'm trying to shift my focus from appearance to function and enjoyment. With food, I had to separate what I'm eating with the calories or the amounts. I had to stop placing value on food. So instead of counting all the calories and making sure I burn more than I eat, I'm focusing on eating foods that I like to eat, foods that are good for me, and recognizing that sometimes treat foods like pie and cake is fine too, as long as it's not one of my main food sources. It's an ongoing process, and it's something I have to remind myself every single day. I've been trying to listen to what my body says it needs instead of micromanaging what I think it needs. A good example of this is my long runs on Sundays. I run 3 to 4 hours for my marathon training block, and I don't know, it slows down my gut. I don't have a huge appetite that day. I eat, but not nearly as much as I logically think I should for someone who just burned 2,000 calories running. And so in the past, I've tried to force in more food and more calories and more carbs to replenish what I had lost, and I felt miserable. And then the next day, I would be ravenous and I'd be eating tons, even though I wasn't running and I wasn't doing any exercise on a rest day, and then I'd feel guilty for overeating on a rest day. Where if I just listen to what my body is saying, accept that after a long run, I'm not going to eat a ton, but the next day I'm going to make up for it. If I listen to that, it all balances out in the end, and I don't need to worry or carry so much anxiety about it. Now, I'm not saying I don't have any structure to my diet, and I don't have any plans for my nutrition. I do plan certain times of day that I eat certain things. For example, I eat something with carbs, like a little granola bar, before I go for a run. And then I've worn a continuous glucose monitor to watch my blood sugar while I'm running so I can learn where and what points I need to use gels or carb gummies to fuel my runs. I try to make all of my meals carb centered because I know that's the primary fuel I'm using as a runner, but I also have a balanced amount of other things as well. And I typically do have a protein shake and a protein bar during the day as well, because I know that as a vegetarian, protein is the macronutrient I'm most likely to be deficient in. And so I'm trying to be mindful of making sure I get enough of that without tracking it and becoming obsessive. And if I ate more in a day than I probably should have, I try not to let it overtake me with anxiety. It's okay to do that some days. And if I gain weight, that's fine too. As long as my body continues to do what I want it to, the size it is less important to me. And I have to keep reminding myself of that every day. So this has been my journey. And I'm on it. Every day it continues. I remind myself of my goals, and I remind myself not to be anxious. I remind myself to not micromanage. And I know that I'm not the only person who has experienced this. We're sold on this idea that losing the weight is the final chapter, but that's just the beginning of a life of living comfortably in your own body. So tell me about your experience. Have you ever lost a ton of weight or even a little bit of weight and you thought that it would make everything better, but then you were disappointed? Tell me some more about that. I think that hearing other people's stories helps us realize that we're not alone. And we all experience similar things. So let me know in the comments. Losing 110 pounds is one of the best things I've ever done. I'm proud of the health that I've gained, and honestly, I'm proud of the way my body looks now that I've lost weight. But the biggest lesson that I've learned is that the number on the scale isn't what puts value on my life. Confidence isn't being just the right size. It's an internal thing. It's about how you feel about yourself regardless of the size of your body. So this will continue on for the rest of my life. My journey isn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I feel okay with that. I feel okay with myself and with my body. And I hope that it continues to carry me through the things that I'm trying to do, especially my marathon coming up, because I've been really working for that.